Haruka had exactly 0 friends, 0 skills worth keeping, and 0 interest in being summoned to another world. And somehow, that made him the most dangerous person in it. He spent his school days sitting alone in class, tuning out the noise of classmates who never once tried to learn his name. Not out of sadness, out of preference. People were exhausting, and Haruka had long decided he was better off without them. Then one morning, without warning, a glowing magic circle cracked open the floor beneath his entire class and started pulling everyone in. Panic, screaming, the usual crowd behavior. Haruka? He checked the doors. Locked. So he climbed into the ceiling, because if there was even a sliver of a chance he could opt out of a fantasy world adventure, he was taking it. The circle caught him anyway, pulled him up into a white void, an astral plane, where an elderly god in robes was already annoyed at him for being late. The old man gestured toward a massive floating library of skills. Pick one, the god said. Except when Haruka started browsing, he quickly realized his classmates had already swept through and claimed everything remotely useful. What remained was a pile of abilities so obscure and low tier they barely qualified as skills at all. Things like magic packing, appraisal, loner. Nothing that would help him survive even a Tuesday in another world. He lost it, started yelling at the god, demanded better options. And the god, fed up with the noise, did something nobody expected. He dumped every single remaining trash skill onto Haruka all at once, then booted him straight into the new world. Haruka landed alone in a forest. He checked his inventory and found the bag that could carry infinite items and an outfit suited for this world. Then he pulled up his status window and saw exactly what the god had done to him. Every stat, strength, magic, agility, stuck at level 1. Every skill considered useless by anyone with standards. Except one. His luck parameter was maxed. Completely, absurdly, broken levels maxed. Haruka stared at it for a long moment, then decided not to overthink it and went looking for food. He used his appraisal skill to identify edible plants and vegetables that would accelerate his leveling. Found a cave tucked into the woods and decided it would do as a home. The next morning, he reinforced the entrance, gathered more supplies, and ran into 2 low-level goblins. He was frightened. They were weak, but he had never fought anything in his life. He enchanted his staff with magic, landed a surprise strike on both of them before they could react, and took them out without taking a single hit. That evening, he checked his status again. Level 2. For the next several days, Haruka fell into a rhythm. Wake up, hunt goblins, level up, improve the cave. He turned the rough shelter into something that actually resembled a home. He cooked mushrooms every morning, ate alone, and felt, genuinely, at peace. Then the mushrooms got old. He headed deeper into the forest hunting for meat and spotted something fast and white darting between the trees. A rabbit. He sprinted after it, tackled it, and the moment he caught it, his perception skill fled. Something nearby. Multiple somethings. He stayed still and listened, and then he saw them, his classmates. The entire class, wandering through the same forest. Every instinct he had told him to run. These were exactly the kind of people he had spent years avoiding. But then he spotted Toka, the class representative, and his feet stopped moving. He had always had a quiet thing for her, watched her from across the room more times than he would ever admit. For a second, he almost stepped forward. He didn't. The loner life was good. He was not throwing that away. Before he could disappear into the trees, the class bullies started moving in his direction. He dove behind a shrub and held completely still. Their leader, Haru, heard something rustle and came to check. Haruka, desperate, released his rabbit. It bolted. Haru watched it go, shrugged, and turned back to his group. Disaster avoided. Haruka trailed behind them at a safe distance, ears open. What he heard was exactly what he expected. Haru running his mouth about the girls in the class and what he planned to do about it. Haruka listened long enough to determine nobody was in immediate danger, then peeled off and returned to his cave. His loner level had gone up. He noticed this, found it funny, and decided not to examine it further. That night, noise from outside pulled him awake. He stepped out expecting to find the bullies causing trouble, and instead found his nerdy classmates getting swarmed by goblins. He ran an appraisal on the group and saw they were all carrying genuinely good skills, abilities that should have made this fight easy. He started to walk away. Not his problem. They could handle it. Then he saw the second group of goblins moving in from the side, a flanking attack the nerds had no idea was coming. Haruka hesitated for exactly 1 second, then moved. He cut through the second group before they reached the nerds, using his staff and his limited but growing skill set to dismantle them quickly. When the dust settled, the nerds turned and stared at him like they had seen a ghost. One of them started clapping, another called him amazing. Haruka was deeply uncomfortable with all of it. He led them back to his cave anyway. They looked around at the furnished interior, the organized layout, the actual livable space he had built from nothing, and their jaws dropped. While they settled in, he asked about the rest of the class. That was when they told him everything. When the class first arrived in this world, Toka had immediately taken charge, organized groups, assigned tasks, built a functioning camp. It worked, until the Gal group decided chores were beneath them and walked out. Their departure cracked the coalition apart. One by one, the other groups stopped pulling their weight. Only the nerds stayed. They helped Toka hold things together for as long as they could. One night, goblins hit the camp. The nerds fought them off. In the aftermath, they noticed the bully group was leveling up rapidly, and then they overheard Haru talking about what he planned to do to the girls. The nerds brought this to Toka. She listened, made a plan, and one night in the woods, she let Haru and his group come to her. She rendered them unconscious. The nerds sealed their charm skills. The bullies were exposed in front of the whole class and thrown out of camp. Peace lasted a few days. Then Haru came back with weapons and burned everything to the ground. The remaining students, looking for someone to blame, turned on the nerds, said they started it. Toka defended them and nobody listened, so the nerds left. Haruka sat quietly through all of this. When they finished, he told them dinner was mushrooms and fried greens, and asked if anyone was hungry. 2 days after the nerds settled in, they announced they were heading for the nearest town and made one last attempt to convince Haruka to come with them. He declined. He liked them well enough, but showing up to civilization with a group of people and a collection of skills that couldn't pass a level 10 requirement was not the entrance he wanted to make. He watched them leave, then went looking for the rest of his class. He didn't find the bullies. He found a campsite that had been completely abandoned, with footprints leading into the trees. He activated his enemy detection skill, followed the trail, and came out into a clearing where the Gal group was hiding in the dark. The moment they saw him, they started running toward him. Haruka turned and ran in the opposite direction. He was fast. They were faster, or at least more motivated. Their leader, Shima, called out to him mid-chase in a voice that stopped him cold. Quiet, genuinely apologetic, completely unlike anything he had ever heard from her. He slowed down, turned around, asked what they wanted. Shima told him the truth. They couldn't fight. They couldn't survive alone. The nerds had been the ones keeping them alive this whole time, and they had treated them terribly, and now they were paying for it. The girls were in tears. They begged Haruka to teach them what he knew. How to fight, how to survive, how to exist in this world without someone else carrying the weight. They promised to change. Haruka looked at them, felt something shift in his chest, opened his mouth to respond, and accidentally activated his subjugation skill. Every single one of them snapped to attention, eyes wide, locked onto him like he had just become the most important person in their world. Because, by the rules of whatever cursed skill he had just triggered, he had. Haruka stood very still. This was bad. This was extremely bad. If Toka found out, she would end him. He started running through options, trying to figure out how to undo what he had just done. So focused on the problem that he didn't notice Toka walking up behind him until she was close enough to tap his shoulder. He jumped. She stared. Then she looked at the Gal group, who was staring at Haruka with expressions that required no interpretation. She asked very calmly what was going on. Haruka's voice stopped working. He stood there long enough that Toka started filling in the blanks herself, and the blanks she was filling in were not flattering. The other girls with her started pulling their own conclusions. The air got very uncomfortable very fast. Haruka tried to explain. Toka heard him out, and then, with the efficient precision of someone who had spent years managing a classroom full of chaos, walked over to Shima, grabbed her by the shoulders, and shook the subjugation effect loose. When it cleared, Shima blinked, looked around, and told Toka what had actually happened, that the subjugation had been an accident, that Haruka had agreed to help them before it triggered, that he hadn't done anything wrong. Toka listened, reassessed, then turned to Haruka and thanked him. He said he was going home. Toka looked at him, then looked at her group of exhausted girls who had been sleeping in the woods, then looked back at him. She swallowed whatever pride she had left and asked, politely, if the girls could stay at his place for the night. Haruka thought about this for 1 second, concluded that life was short and some opportunities didn't come twice, and said yes. The walk back took a while. When they arrived, the girls fanned out immediately, running from room to room, pulling open doors, marvelling at the fact that he had built something this functional in what felt like no time at all. Haruka pointed them toward the bathroom. They took that as permission to make themselves at home in every possible sense of the word, and what followed was enough to permanently damage whatever was left of Haruka's composure. He set up a tent outside and decided that was where he was sleeping. Toka found him there later. She sat down nearby and thanked him. Not the quick, formal kind of thanks, but the slower kind that meant something. She admitted she didn't feel like she was doing a good job leading everyone, that she looked at the nerds who could take down monsters with ease and felt like she was falling behind. Haruka told her she was thinking about it wrong. The nerds were built for combat. That didn't make them better at everything else. She had kept people organized, kept things moving, made the call to bring the girls here tonight. That was its own kind of strength. Toka went quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, said goodnight, and went inside. Haruka sat in the tent and thought very carefully about the fact that his entire class of girls was lying in his house. He decided he was staying in the tent. Morning came. He opened his eyes to find a girl named Chika sitting inside the tent, telling him breakfast was ready. She had made mushrooms and grilled fish. Haruka, who had not eaten fish since arriving in this world despite living 15 meters from a river, shot upright. At the table, Toka and Chika watched him devour it and asked why he hadn't just caught fish himself. He explained, with complete sincerity, that fish were fast and slippery, and he had failed every attempt. They stared at him. Then Toka nodded to a girl named Amime, who walked to the riverbank, raised her hand, and sent a bolt of lightning into the water. Dozens of fish floated to the surface. Haruka watched this, got an idea, asked Amime to do it again. When she hesitated, he reached out, wrapped her lightning spell inside his magic packing ability, essentially trapping the electrical charge inside an invisible container, and used it like bait, drawing fish in before releasing it. The fish didn't stand a chance. He stood up from the riverbank holding his first catch and felt his lightning skill unlock at level 1. Toka asked how he had done that. He explained his packing ability could capture and contain elemental magic. She called it impressive. He decided not to tell her how long it had taken him to figure that out. That afternoon, Toka told him she wanted to find the nearest town, but she wanted to level up first. Haruka offered to run a training session. He gathered the girls, asked for their current levels, and discovered the average was 15, nearly double his own 8. He quietly recalibrated his expectations of what he was contributing to this group. He spotted a pair of kobolds lurking in the brush and told the girls to take them on. They stretched, they cracked their knuckles. Haruka cheered. The kobolds folded them in seconds. He kept his expression neutral while the girls argued about what went wrong. Later, Chika caught him alone and thanked him again, not for the training, but for being different from the bullies. She said she appreciated that he actually wanted to help. She promised him a cooked fish every morning from here on. Haruka decided that was the best trade deal he had made since arriving in this world. The next day, the girls trained properly. They came back to the kobolds focused and coordinated, and this time they dismantled them cleanly. Toka high-fived every one of them afterward, and the satisfaction on her face was obvious. Haruka watched the whole thing and started thinking about heading back to his loner routine. Then Toka appeared beside him, told him she was glad he had helped, and informed him he would be joining them on the road to the nearest town. He opened his mouth. She had already turned and walked away. That night, somewhere in the dark stretch of forest between camp and nowhere, an unidentified student was sprinting for his life. The rain had turned the ground slick and uneven. He slipped, went down hard. By the time he looked up, the hooded figure chasing him had already closed the distance. A hand closed around his throat. And that was the end of that. Haruka didn't know any of this yet. The following morning, he was leading the girls out of the woods at a pace that suggested he knew what he was doing. He didn't entirely, but he knew the forest well enough by now to navigate it without getting anyone killed. On the way, they ran into an orc, a massive one, the kind that had apparently decided its entire life purpose was getting as large as physically possible. Haruka told the girls to watch him closely, that he would show them how to handle something like this. He charged. At the last second, he ducked sideways and hid behind a tree, quietly running calculations on which of his skills might actually work against something that size. The orc sniffed him out immediately. Haruka, left with no good options, hit it with his staff. Once. The orc dropped. The girls stared at the unconscious creature, then stared at him, thoroughly unimpressed. They had learned nothing. He hadn't shown them anything. He had just hit it. He tried again with the next orc they found, this time leading with a fireball, clean and efficient. The orc went down. The girls crossed their arms. Toka told him, politely but directly, that she couldn't learn anything by watching him fight because he made it look too easy. There was nothing to study. Haruka accepted this criticism and said nothing. That evening, while the girls ate roasted orc meat around a fire, he pulled up a new skill he hadn't examined yet. Something that functioned like a map, overlaying the forest around him with movement indicators. He scanned the tree line and spotted figures moving in the dark. His first thought was the bullies. His second thought, once he looked closer, was relief. It was the gym bros, the athletic group from his class, picking their way through the trees with their heads down. He stepped toward them. They saw him and immediately started denying everything he hadn't even accused them of yet. They weren't here for the girls, they said. They weren't trying anything. Haruka told them he hadn't assumed that. They relaxed slightly. One of them got serious. He explained that someone in the class had a skill worse than charm, something called hijack. It allowed the user to steal another person's skill by defeating them in combat. The gym bros were certain the bullies didn't have it, which meant someone else did. Someone they hadn't identified yet. They asked Haruka to pass an apology to the girls on their behalf, then disappeared back into the trees. Haruka stood there in the dark, processing this. He turned around to head back to camp and nearly walked directly into Toka, who had been standing 3 meters behind him the entire time. The next morning, she came to him first. She started to apologize for keeping secrets, specifically for not telling him about her own skill. Haruka cut her off and told her not to worry about it. He already knew. She had the hijack ability. She went still, asked how he had figured it out. He told her he had thought it through, which was the most honest answer he had. Then she reminded him, quietly, that hijack required defeating someone to take their skill, that it was a weapon, and a dangerous one, and that knowing she had it hadn't scared him off. She wanted to understand why. He told her the nerds knew too. They had known since early on and decided to trust her with it rather than fear her. He was doing the same. That was all. Simple as that. Toka looked away. Her face had gone slightly red around the edges. She thanked him and left without another word. Later that morning, Haruka brought juice to the girls, who were tired from walking. One of them offered to pay him back in a way that made his brain temporarily stop functioning. Before he could respond, Toka materialized from somewhere nearby and shut the entire conversation down with a single look. Haruka accepted this outcome and moved on. He told the girls to wait, then sprinted ahead to scout the path forward. He stacked a physical enhancement on himself, combined it with a weight reduction effect, and launched himself up into the trees. Moving through the canopy at that speed felt remarkable. branch to branch, higher and faster, until at some point he realized his feet weren't touching anything anymore. He was airborne, actually flying. Not gracefully, not under full control, but genuinely off the ground and moving through open air above the tree line. Then he noticed he was descending. He hit the ground at a speed that would have been embarrassing if anyone had seen it. Nobody had. He picked himself up, checked his status window, and found a new entry: airwalk. He tested it, rose a meter off the ground, steady, controlled, walked in a small circle above the soil, confirmed it was real. The following day they cleared the forest. The girls burst out of the tree line like they had been holding their breath for a week, and maybe they had. Open sky, open field, hills rolling out in every direction. Haruka scanned the terrain. The hills blocked his sightlines. He tested the airwalk skill again, rose above the ground until he had a clear view across the landscape, and immediately spotted trouble. A group of adventurers in the distance, completely surrounded by a pack of wolves. He came back down and told Toka what he had seen. She said they had to help. He said he had no idea if these people were friendly or dangerous, and he preferred to check first. He would go alone, verify the situation, and come back. This was a reasonable plan. He began stacking his abilities: physical buff, wind generation, airwalk, building up speed for a fast approach. Toka. He didn't notice until he was already moving. The wind caught her and pulled her in, and then he was rocketing across the open field with Toka screaming at full volume directly behind him, and the aerodynamics of the whole situation meant he had lost control entirely. They hit the adventurer camp like a meteor. When the dust cleared, every wolf in a 20-meter radius was unconscious. The adventurers were completely unharmed and extremely confused. Their leader stepped forward, introduced himself as Offa, and thanked Haruka for saving his group. Haruka was startled to realize he could understand him perfectly. Apparently, his translation skill had been working the whole time without him noticing. Offa explained they had been on an extermination mission, clearing out wolves that had been attacking merchant caravans in the area. Haruka handed out medicinal mushrooms to the injured adventurers. The adventurers reacted like he had just produced something priceless. Toka regained consciousness from the landing, and the rest of the girls caught up shortly after. The moment they saw the female adventurers, elves, graceful and tall, the girls immediately swarmed them. Offa offered to guide the group to the nearest town. The girls were already walking before he finished the sentence. The town was called Amwi. It sat behind stone walls at the edge of the forest, compact and bustling. The girls entered like they were on vacation, immediately disappearing into stores and storefronts. Haruka followed Offa toward the Adventurers Guild and spent the walk in quietly, noticing the looks the guild regulars were giving him as he came through the door. Hardened people, experienced fighters, every one of them was looking at him like he was something they hadn't catalogued yet. He was summoned to see the guild boss, a man who appeared to have not smiled in living memory. Haruka prepared himself for interrogation. The guild boss thanked him for saving Offa's party and said nothing else threatening. Haruka decided this was fine. Afterward, he stopped by the guild's appraiser and emptied his bag of every gem he had collected from monster drops in the forest. The attendant stared at the pile, then stared at him, then told him there wasn't enough coin on the premises to cover this, and he would need to come back tomorrow. Haruka said that was fine. As he turned to leave, he found the girls already registered as adventurers, with Shima physically steering him toward the registration desk before he could object. The guild staff checked his level, checked the minimum requirement, and informed him that at level 8 he didn't qualify, level 10 for party registration, level 20 for solo. He was stuck in civilian status until further notice. That evening, Toka led everyone to a lodging. Haruka looked at the sign above the entrance, looked at the logo on the door, looked at the general aesthetic of the building, and became convinced they were checking into a love hotel. He said nothing, slept deeply regardless, woke up to sunlight and the smell of a town that was already running at full speed, and sat down at a restaurant with the quiet intention of eating breakfast, collecting his payment from the guild, and then walking back into the woods permanently. He almost made it. The guild boss handed him his first payment, 8 million coins, with more to come in installments because they simply didn't have the full amount available. Haruka sat with that number for a moment. Then he thought about what 8 million coins could buy. The girls were already thinking the same thing, louder and with more coordination. Before he fully understood what was happening, Gadik, one of the male classmates, was pulling him toward a shop he had personally vetted. Haruka had been hoping for something interesting. What he got was a weapons and artifact dealer with the ambience of a storage unit. He browsed anyway, found a cloak that rendered him effectively invisible to passive detection, found a glove that boosted attack power, spent the next few hours moving through the shelves with the focused attention of someone who had spent weeks making do with a staff and improvised spells. His cart filled up faster than he tracked. Then a necklace caught his eye. The appraiser told him it was a combining item. It allowed the user to merge multiple magical weapons and access their properties simultaneously. Haruka immediately thought about how he had been combining his skills for weeks using his packing ability. This was the same principle applied to equipment. He reached for it. Toka arrived. She told him it was late. He was startled, his hand moved, and somehow, in the fraction of a second between her arrival and his reaction, he had accidentally merged nearly everything in his cart into a single fused item. The shopkeeper appeared, did the math, informed Haruka he owed 10 million coins for what was now one irreversible combined artifact. Gadik, who had caused all of this by bringing him here, spent the next 10 minutes negotiating the price down to 8 million. Haruka walked out of the shop with essentially 0 coins, one extraordinarily powerful combined weapon, and the specific emotional experience of a man who had briefly been wealthy. He woke up the next morning, staring at the ceiling with the specific misery of someone who had been rich for approximately 4 hours. 8 million coins, gone. He ran the numbers once, decided running them again wouldn't help, and got up. The problem beyond the money was the walls. And we didn't let outsiders leave without adventurous status and a permit. He was level 8. The minimum was 10 for a party, 20 for solo. Which meant he was trapped inside a town with a full class of his classmates, no privacy and no woods to retreat into. The loner lifestyle was not built for this. He activated the invisibility cloak, slipped out of the lodging before anyone was awake, and made his way toward the town gate. This worked beautifully for about 3 minutes. Then a group of girls from his class spotted him. The celebrity group, the ones who occupied a social tier somewhere between the gal group and royalty. They asked what he was doing. He didn't have a good answer, lost his footing, and came down hard enough to confirm that invisible did not mean intangible. He picked himself up and looked to the group. One of them was missing. He found her at a nearby clothing store, running her hands along the fabric with the expression of someone preparing to make a decision that would cause an international incident. Haruka knew immediately what the decision was. This particular classmate had a philosophy regarding clothing that could be summarized as optional, and the look on her face said she was about 3 seconds from demonstrating that philosophy in a public market. All 4 of them sprinted. It took everything Haruka had, combined with every ounce of persuasion he could summon on no sleep and an empty stomach, to talk her into keeping her clothes on. She accepted this outcome reluctantly. He walked away from the interaction feeling he had prevented something that would have ended with him fleeing the country. The following morning, Toka announced the girls were heading out on a guild quest and told Haruka he wasn't coming, punishment for the previous day's escape attempt. He agreed readily, watched them leave, waited until the sound of their footsteps had completely faded, then activated the cloak, walked to the front gate, and showed the guard his face. The guard. Haruka stood outside the gate in his mind, working through alternatives. Then he remembered Marielle, the Lord's daughter. She had mentioned gratitude, she had mentioned coins, and more importantly, she had mentioned a noble identity card, the kind that let the holder move freely in and out of town without a permit. He tracked her down, explained he needed the card to look for missing classmates he was worried about, and she handed it over. He He was thinking about heading back to his cave when he heard it. Shouting, metal, the unmistakable chaos of an ambush in progress. He came around a bend in the road and found a noble carriage surrounded by bandits, one of them with a spear already drawn. Inside the carriage, someone was crying. Then a bandit threw a spear at him. He dodged it cleanly, not because he had been expecting it, but because his body had gotten faster than he realized over the past few weeks. He tried explaining to the bandits that he was just passing through and had no interest in their operation. They didn't listen. He pulled his staff, hit the nearest one with a fireball, and watched the rest of them scramble. They recovered faster than he expected, came back swinging, and he spent the next few minutes dodging everything they threw at him until they had completely exhausted themselves and collapsed. The carriage door opened. A girl stepped out, polished, composed, a little shaken. She introduced herself as Marielle and thanked him for defeating the bandits. Then she paused and looked at the unconscious pile of men around her, and quietly observed that they had sort of beaten themselves. Haruka looked at her, concluded she was operating on significantly fewer brain cells than advertised. Marielle asked his name, said she would like to repay him properly, and asked if he would escort her the rest of the way to her destination. He agreed before remembering to ask where she was going. They walked. Haruka mentioned, conversationally, that he had just come from a nearby town with an absurd permitting system run by a lord who clearly had too much bureaucratic power. He made his feelings about this known in moderate detail. Marielle went very quiet. Then she started crying, because her father, she explained, was the lord of the town he was describing, which meant they were walking directly back to the place he had just escaped from. He begged her to let him go. She refused. While Haruka was being escorted back into captivity, something was happening in the woods that none of them knew about yet. Haru, the bully leader, was moving through the trees with his group, headed toward the nerd camp to get his sealed skills back. The gym bros had tracked them and stepped into their path, unwilling to let them reach the girls. Both groups squared off. Then the hooded figure appeared from nowhere and put a blade through Haru's back. The remaining bullies turned to fight. They ended up like Haru. The gym bros ran. It didn't help. The hooded figure caught them too, and by the time he was finished, they were lying broken in the undergrowth, breathing but barely. Haruka knew none of this yet. He was sitting in the Lord's mansion waiting for Marielle to finish freshening up, trying to identify the fastest route to the nearest exit. When she found him edging toward the door, he said he just needed some air. She sat him down at a dinner table loaded with more meat than he had seen since arriving in this world, and he immediately stopped thinking about escaping. She tried to talk to him through the entire meal. He was not listening. She tried harder. He kept eating. Finally, she put an offer on the table. A significant amount of coins and a permanent noble identity card allowing unrestricted movement in and out of town. Haruka looked up from his plate, considered this seriously, then went back to eating. The next morning, he told Toka he had been to the Lord's mansion the night before. She asked why. His throat closed. He said he couldn't remember exactly. She told him to stay in town and not do anything reckless, and he agreed, with the full intention of immediately doing something reckless. Once the girls left for their quest, he used the identity card, resupplied, left Toka a note about searching for the gym bros, and walked out the gate into a forest that had gotten quieter than it should have been. He found them in the undergrowth an hour later, both of them on the ground, motionless. He checked for pulses. Still there. He pulled out his strongest healing potions and worked quickly. Not because he particularly wanted anyone to die in front of him. One of them opened his eyes, said they had messed up, asked immediately if the girls were safe. Haruka told him yes, everyone was fine. Then the gym bros told him about the hooded figure, about how the bullies were gone, about how the attacker was working from a plan that had been running since the beginning, someone who had been pulling strings from the start, using the bullies as tools to fracture the class and isolate targets. And his next target, they said, was Toka, because she had the hijack skill, and only a very small number of people knew that.
Haruka asked how they had figured out about the skill. They told him the attacker had been searching for her specifically, and when he couldn't find her, he had beaten them badly enough that he expected them to run straight to her for help. They had gone the opposite direction instead, bought time, and now they were telling Haruka, because they had one option left: find this person and take him down before he reached the girls. Haruka thought about it, told them he would handle it, alone. They looked at him like he had said something insane, which was fair, but they could see he meant it and they respected that. He told them to get back to town, find Toka, and apologize for being idiots. They nodded. He watched them go. Standing alone in the silent forest, Haruka admitted to himself that backup would have been useful. Then he admitted that if backup failed against whoever this was, there would be no one left to stand between the girls and what came next. He made his decision and started moving. He moved through the forest with his status window open, thinking. The gym bros had mentioned the attacker's weapon skill, something powerful enough to dismantle the bullies and 2 trained fighters without breaking a sweat. He knew how weapon skills worked. Once activated, they locked the user into a sequence. They couldn't be cancelled mid-use. The window between activation and completion was a vulnerability. Small, but real. He started working through his available skills, the ones everyone else had dismissed as garbage, and began building something new around that window. Not a single ability, a combination. Something designed specifically to punish the moment a weapon skill committed. He didn't have a name for it yet. He kept moving. The forest was getting darker between the trees, the undergrowth thicker. A group of goblins materialized from the shadows ahead of him. He ran a quick appraisal and found they were running at twice his current level. He attacked anyway. They went down cleanly, one after another, each exchange faster and more precise than the last. He stood over the final one and felt nothing but mild dissatisfaction. They were too easy. He needed something stronger if he was going to close the gap before this confrontation happened. As if on cue, a shape emerged from deeper in the trees, larger than any goblin he had fought before. He ran an appraisal. Goblin King. The creature was carrying a weapon that looked like it had been salvaged from a much larger monster, and it swung with the kind of confidence that came from never having lost a fight in this section of forest. Haruka pulled up the combination technique he had been building in his head, layered his skills together through his packing ability, and launched a counterattack timed to the exact moment the Goblin King committed to its swing. The strike connected with everything he had behind it. The Goblin King hit the dirt and didn't get up. Haruka stood in the silence that followed and realized something. Every one of his so-called trash skills had just contributed to that hit. The appraisal, the packing, the physical buff, the weight adjustment, the timing window he had identified by studying weapon skill mechanics. None of them were useless. They were just pieces. The combination was where the power lived. He didn't have long to sit with the realization. Something moved behind him. Something big enough that the air pressure changed when it stepped forward. He turned around, ran an appraisal before he even finished turning. Level 50, Goblin Emperor. He was level 9. The gap between them was not a gap. It was a canyon. He knew this. He also knew that standing still was not going to improve the situation, so he attacked first. A fast combination strike designed to catch the Emperor before it could set its stance. It connected. The creature went down to one knee. Then it stood back up. What followed was the longest fight of Haruka's life in this world. The Emperor moved with a speed that didn't match its size, and every time Haruka identified a pattern in its attacks, it shifted. He burned through skill combinations faster than he could rebuild them. He spotted the creature activating a weapon skill and threw everything he had at the opening. Landed real damage. The Emperor healed it in seconds. Then it hit him hard enough to send him through 3 trees before he stopped moving. He lay in the undergrowth and took inventory. Everything hurt. His mana was running low. His stamina was worse. He thought about the gym bros lying in the grass when he had found them. The shape they had been in after just one encounter with whoever was hunting Toka. He was in better condition than that right now. Marginally. But still better. He stood up.
The fight continued. He stopped trying to end it quickly and started trying to outlast it instead. Moving, redirecting, using the terrain to compensate for the level difference, exploiting every fractional opening the Emperor gave him. Slowly, incrementally, the creature's rhythm began to show its edges. He found the angle, pushed through it, and eventually, the Goblin Emperor went down and stayed down.
Haruka checked his status window while still catching his breath. Level 11. He had cleared 2 levels in one night. He sat on a fallen log and allowed himself 90 seconds of not moving before getting up and continuing forward. Back in town, the gym bros had made it to the guild. Toka saw them come through the door and immediately registered that something was wrong. She asked what had happened and where Haruka was. They told her. He was in the woods, fighting by himself, against whoever had done this to them. Her expression didn't change, but she was already moving before they finished the sentence. In the forest, Haruka had been tracking movement for the past 10 minutes, a presence that was deliberately staying at the edge of his detection range. Not a monster, too controlled, too patient. He stopped walking and waited, and the presence came forward on its own. Tanaka stepped out of the shadows. Haruka recognized him immediately. Tanaka had been one of the class's quieter members, sharp, observant, the kind of person who watched everything and said little. The kind of person Haruka had never paid much attention to, which, he was beginning to understand, had been intentional. Tanaka didn't seem surprised to be facing him. He seemed, if anything, slightly annoyed. He explained, without being asked, that he had expected the gym bros to run straight back to Toka and lead him directly to her. They had gone the opposite direction instead, an error in his calculations. He did not appear to enjoy making errors. Haruka asked, as calmly as he could manage, what had happened to their other classmates, the ones who weren't accounted for. Tanaka confirmed what the gym bros had implied, that he had been running the bullies from the beginning, that Haru and his group had never been acting on their own initiative. They had been tools, used to fracture the class, separate people, create vulnerability. The camp burning, the expulsion of the nerds, the girls being driven into the woods, all of it had been Tanaka's design. Haruka felt the anger rise in him like something finally reaching its temperature. He kept his voice level. Asked again about the classmates. Tanaka gave him a look that said the answer didn't matter, because Haruka wasn't going to be in a position to do anything about it regardless. Then he reached for his weapon. Haruka had spent the last 2 hours building a counter to exactly this moment. He watched Tanaka's stance shift, identified the weapon skill beginning to activate, and moved into the opening before it could complete. His strike landed clean. Tanaka took the hit with an expression of genuine surprise, the kind that came from running calculations and finding an answer that didn't fit the model. He recovered fast, faster than Haruka had anticipated, and what came next was a different category of fight entirely from anything the Goblin Emperor had put him through. Tanaka moved like someone who had spent his entire time in this world doing nothing but training. Precise, economical, each technique deployed at the correct moment with the correct amount of force. He was not improvising. He had planned this fight the same way he had planned everything else. Haruka stopped trying to match him technically and started doing what he had always done, combining. Stacking abilities on top of each other in configurations Tanaka couldn't have calculated for, because they weren't combinations anyone else would have thought to build. He pushed the pressure forward, landed hits that made Tanaka step back for the first time, built toward a finishing sequence. Then Tanaka cast a spell mid-exchange that Haruka hadn't seen coming. He adjusted, reminded himself that Tanaka had been given legitimate cheat-tier abilities by the same god who had given him trash. This was not a fight where he could afford assumptions. He had to treat every moment like a new problem. Tanaka, for the first time, looked something adjacent to unsettled. He announced that he hadn't used his strongest skill yet, that everything so far had been a warm-up. He launched himself from above with enough force to crater the ground between them. Haruka taunted him before he landed, asked if that was really everything he had, and felt the ground shake when the attack connected with the earth instead of him. Then Tanaka reappeared behind him. The instant death technique activated before Haruka registered the movement. It landed, and Haruka went down. Tanaka stood over him and said something about it being a waste, about how once he took the hijack skill from Toka, none of this would matter. He turned to leave. Haruka spoke. One word. Tanaka's name. Quietly, from the ground. Tanaka turned back around, stared. Haruka was sitting up. Tanaka asked, in a voice that had lost some of its composure, why the instant death technique had failed. Haruka explained it simply. His general health ability absorbed harmful status effects passively, and instant death qualified as a harmful status effect. With his luck parameter maxed, the probability of it succeeding against him dropped to something close to 0. He had known this going in, he just hadn't mentioned it. Tanaka asked why he had fallen at all. Haruka said he hadn't wanted to embarrass him. Then Tanaka asked how he had kept moving when he had used the technique designed to freeze the target in place. Haruka activated his puppeteer skill as a demonstration, a skill that allowed him to operate his own body like a marionette, bypassing the freeze condition entirely. Tanaka stared at it, started to understand, slowly and unpleasantly, that the skills he had dismissed as worthless were not worthless. They were a different architecture, one his calculations hadn't modeled. He attacked again. Haruka parried each strike and pointed out between exchanges that Tanaka was burning through his skill uses at a rate that wasn't sustainable, that the math he was so proud of had a gap in it. It didn't account for the unpredictable. In a world that ran on magic and monsters and luck parameters, unpredictable was not an edge case. It was the baseline condition. Tanaka went quiet for a moment, and then, in the space between one exchange and the next, he said something that wasn't a threat. He talked about their old world, about how ordinary it had been, how tedious. He had always wanted something larger than what a classroom and a schedule could contain. When the magic circle appeared in their class that morning, he had felt it like a door opening, and he had walked through it with a plan already forming. He had not expected Haruka to be the one standing across from him at the end of it. Haruka stripped his weapon mid-strike and moved in for the finish. Tanaka remotely pulled the blade back through the air and drove it through him from behind. Haruka kept moving. Tanaka pressed the assault, said the outcome was already determined mathematically. Haruka told him that an Einstein brain was useless if he hadn't trained his body to back it up. Then he activated the combination technique he had spent the entire night building, the one designed around the weapon skill window, the one assembled from every piece of garbage the god had dropped on him in that astral library. He called it the Gambit. Tanaka didn't have a counter for it, because no one could have planned for it. It connected with everything behind it, and Tanaka went down. The forest went quiet. Haruka stood in the middle of it, mana completely drained, legs threatening to give out under him, and stayed upright through sheer stubbornness. He was about to sit down when lights appeared between the trees, the nerds moving fast, calling his name. They had gone looking when he didn't come back to town. They reached him, assessed the situation in about 3 seconds, and got an arm under each of his shoulders. As they walked him out of the forest, one of them mentioned that everyone had been worried, that the girls knew he had gone out to fight alone and had not taken the news calmly. The girls were waiting at the tree line. They greeted him with the specific energy of people who had been scared and had converted that fear into something that looked like irritation. Toka stood slightly apart from the rest. She looked at him for a long moment without saying anything. Then she said she was glad he was alive. Then she said the girls were going to have words with him about going off alone. Then she and Shima each took one of his arms and walked him back toward town in a way that made escape structurally impossible. Behind them, the entire class had regrouped. Every faction, every group, standing in the same space for the first time since arriving in this world. Haruka looked at them over his shoulder and thought, quietly, that they might not need him anymore, that this might be his moment to slip back into the background. Toka tightened her grip on his arm. He kept walking. The next morning, Haruka ran into the nerds outside the guild and asked where they were headed. They told him they were going after a rare item in the dungeon, something that would make people stop treating them like they were disposable. He watched them go and did a quiet inventory of his situation.
Tanaka was handled, the class was together, the nerds were on their feet and moving with purpose. His work here was done. He could feel the woods calling him back.
He turned around and walked directly into Toka.
She said they needed to talk. He asked if she was going to scold him again, referencing the lecture the girls had already delivered the night before, with coordinated thoroughness. She told him that hadn't been her lecture, that was theirs. His was now. She looked him in the eye and told him in clear and specific terms that going after Tanaka alone had been reckless and irresponsible, and that if he ever pulled something like that again, she would personally make his life significantly more unpleasant than any goblin emperor could manage. He apologized immediately and sincerely because she was objectively more frightening. After she left, he stood outside the guild thinking about the item the nerds had mentioned, the rare one, the one in the dungeon. If he could find it first, he reasoned, nobody would have a reason to keep lecturing him. It was a thin justification, and he knew it, but it pointed in the direction he wanted to go anyway, so he committed to it and started moving. The merchant who dealt in special artifacts occupied a shop that felt like it had been designed specifically to discourage customers. The man inside looked at Haruka like he was already a problem. Haruka told him he was looking for information about a favorability item, something that would make people respond better to the person carrying it. The merchant's expression shifted from suspicious to merely guarded. He told Haruka about the pheromone ring, said it was located somewhere past the 50th floor of the dungeon, in a section that hadn't been fully explored. He explained the dungeon had 100 floors, each one guarded by a floor master that had to be defeated before the next level opened. He also mentioned, in the tone of someone sharing a rumor they didn't fully believe, that something called the Dungeon Emperor was supposed to inhabit the lowest level. He told Haruka to buy potions before going in. Haruka said he would get them from the general store. The merchant looked personally offended. The nerds had overheard the conversation. By the time Haruka walked out, they had already told the girls. By the time he was halfway to the dungeon entrance, his entire class had assembled in front of it, waiting for him. Toka asked why he wanted the pheromone ring. He told her he didn't. He was after the Solomon ring, which allowed the user to communicate with animals. Nobody believed this. He could tell from their faces that they had already decided he was lying and had collectively agreed to stop him. He ran. They chased him into the dungeon entrance, which was not the plan, but the plan had stopped being operative the moment he opened his mouth. He was moving fast enough to stay ahead of them, fast enough to feel like this might actually work, and then his foot hit a pressure plate he hadn't seen, and the floor disappeared beneath him. He dropped. The fall lasted long enough that he had time to register exactly how bad the situation was before he hit the bottom. He threw up an earth magic cushion at the last second, converted the stone beneath him into something with enough give to absorb the impact. He landed hard, but landed whole. Lay there for a moment, staring up at a shaft of darkness that went further than he could see. Above him, somewhere far up, he could hear Toka calling his name. He called back that he was fine. Then he looked around. He was in a corridor he had never seen referenced in anything the Dungeons Guild documentation mentioned. He pulled up his status window and found 2 new entries, Spatial Awareness and Trap Detection, both unlocked from the fall. He used them to scan the passage around him, found a hallway branching off to the left that might lead somewhere, started walking. The air got heavier the further he went. Not hot, heavy. The kind of dense pressure that sat in the lungs and made each breath feel slightly less efficient than the last. Miasma. He had heard the word in passing from guild members talking about the deeper floors. He understood now what they meant. He pressed forward because stopping wasn't an option, and eventually reached a door at the end of the corridor. Stone. Old. The kind of door that had been here longer than the town above it. He ran an appraisal on what was behind it. The reading came back incomplete. The level was hidden, which meant whatever was on the other side was either too powerful to properly evaluate or something the system didn't have a clean category for. He had found the 101st floor. He had gone past the bottom of the dungeon. He opened the door. The figure inside was enormous, a skeletal shape in ancient armor, radiating the kind of presence that made the air feel structurally unsound. It turned toward him with the slow certainty of something that had been waiting down here for a very long time. Haruka ran a full appraisal. Level 100, the Dungeon Emperor. He assessed his options in approximately 1 second and concluded that ranged attacks were not going to accomplish anything against something this size in an enclosed space. He closed the distance fast and attacked at high speed, leading with a physical buff and every acceleration skill he had available. The Emperor blocked his first strike with one arm and didn't move. Not a step, not a shift in weight, just blocked it and stood there. Haruka reset and tried again. And again. Each exchange told him the same thing. The Emperor could match his speed precisely. Not overpower it, match it. Which meant there was a ceiling to this fight, and he was going to hit it. He pushed past the ceiling anyway. Relentless, continuous strikes, varying the angles faster than the Emperor could predict. His contact lens flickered, something activated at the edge of his perception, a new reading he hadn't seen before. A vision, himself, from the outside, half a second in the future, getting hit. He yanked sideways before the Emperor's counterattack arrived and felt the air from it pass across his shoulder. Precognition. He had unlocked precognition. Even with it, the margin was razor thin. One mistake would end the fight immediately and permanently. He kept moving, kept combining, kept pushing against a ceiling that wasn't giving. And eventually, his mana ran out. His stamina followed. His legs sent him a message that they were done, and his arms replied that they had stopped working several minutes ago. He came to a stop, breathing hard, and watched the Emperor walk slowly toward him. It stopped, stood over him, and did nothing. Haruka waited. The Emperor didn't move. He stayed very still and paid attention to the quality of the silence, and what he noticed was that there was nothing coming from the Emperor that resembled intent, no aggression, no energy coiling toward a finishing strike. The miasma in the air was thick and getting thicker, but the creature itself felt different from that, separate from it somehow, like the miasma was doing something to it rather than coming from it. He looked at his staff. It was absorbing the miasma, slowly, passively, the way it had been absorbing ambient magic since he first picked it up without fully understanding what it was doing. He looked at the Emperor, looked at the miasma, made a decision. He attacked again, not to win, to give the staff time. He kept moving, kept the contact sustained, kept the staff drawing in the dark energy that saturated the air on this level. The Emperor deflected each strike, but didn't pursue. It was letting him do this. He could feel it. The creature was cooperating with the only approach that might actually help it. The miasma thinned, the pressure in the air lightened, and the Emperor lowered its weapon. Haruka stood in the quiet that followed and looked at the figure in front of him and understood, in the way that sometimes understanding arrived without announcement, that this thing had been down here for a very long time. That it had been controlled by the miasma, that it had been waiting, possibly for years, for someone to walk through that door who could absorb what was keeping it trapped. He couldn't destroy it. He looked at it and simply could not bring himself to do it. Instead, he stepped forward and put his arms around it. The subjugate skill activated. He hadn't called it. It responded to something else, some quality of the action, the intent behind it, the contact. Whatever the mechanism, the result was immediate. The remaining miasma shredded away from the Emperor like it had been cut loose. The enormous figure went still. The chamber felt, for the first time, like a room instead of a trap. Haruka stepped back and asked quietly if it was willing to work with him. Silence. Then the Emperor shook its head, not in refusal, but in something closer to uncertainty. He ran an appraisal and found the level had reset to 1, and a name, Angelica. He stared at the name for a long moment, then at the skeletal figure, then at the name again. He had, without planning to, turned the Dungeon Emperor into his servant. She was a girl. He brushed past this as quickly as possible and told her they needed to start moving. They climbed back through the dungeon from the inside, floor by floor, working upward through territory that had never been cleared from this direction. On the 100th floor, a floor master appeared, a living suit of armor running at level 100. Haruka looked at it,
calculated his current mana reserves, and accepted that this fight was beyond him after everything he had already burned through tonight.
He tried the ceiling instead. Earth magic shaped into an opening above him, airwalk ready to carry them through. He looked up and found 2 level 99 Minotaurs waiting in the passage above. He looked back at the Floormaster. He looked at his hands. He looked at Angelica. She was already moving. She went through all 3 of them with the calm efficiency of something that had spent decades as the apex predator of this dungeon, level 1 or not. The Floormaster dropped. The Minotaurs dropped. She stood in the aftermath with no particular expression that Haruka could read, then turned her attention to the armor the Floormaster had left behind. She wanted to wear it. He could tell from the way she looked at it. He said nothing while she lifted the pieces and began putting them on, and then said something when he noticed it was clearly designed for someone 3 times her size. She disappeared into it. The armor sat for a moment on the floor. Then it began to shift, compressing, reshaping, reforming around her frame until it fit. When it settled, Haruka ran an appraisal out of habit and found a single word alongside the armor's description. Cursed. Angelica's reaction made it clear she had read the same result. Her shoulders dropped in a way that communicated more than words would have. Haruka looked at her expression and felt, with sudden clarity, that he had seen that exact energy before. In Toka. The same sharp, precise, quietly furious response to an outcome that was unfair. He filed this information away and said nothing useful, because there was nothing useful to say about a cursed suit of armor that had just decided to permanently attach itself to someone. They kept climbing. On the 50th floor, the rest of the class was having a significantly worse night. The Cyclops had appeared without warning, a single creature, level 100, filling the corridor from wall to wall with a presence that made the floor shake when it moved. Kakazaki and Oda had been running assessments since the moment it appeared, and neither of them liked what the numbers were saying. The girls had been pushing attacks from range for several minutes. None of it was landing with enough force to matter. The Cyclops absorbed everything and kept moving forward with the patience of something that understood it was going to win eventually. Exhaustion was setting in. Haruka's group had been gone long enough that nobody was saying out loud what they were all quietly calculating. Kakazaki looked at the ceiling and thought about what Haruka would do in this situation. The answer, historically, was something that looked insane until it worked. He looked at Oda. Oda was already notching an arrow. The plan came together in about 30 seconds. Kakazaki activated his acceleration skill and charged directly at the Cyclops. Not to attack, but to draw its attention completely. The creature swung at him. He took the hit and stayed on his feet through sheer refusal to fall, while the girls hammered it from the sides with every elemental combination they had, keeping the pressure loud and visible. The Cyclops raised its fist for a second swing. Oda fired. One arrow, full power, straight through the Cyclops' single eye before it could complete the motion. The creature stood for a moment that lasted too long, then came down like a wall collapsing. The floor shook when it hit. Everyone stood in the silence that followed, breathing hard, looking at each other. Toka looked at Kakazaki and Oda. The way they had coordinated, the way the whole group had functioned as a single mechanism without anyone needing to stop and explain the plan. She thought about where that had come from, about who had spent days running training exercises in a forest clearing, moving between groups, finding the specific combination of ability and personality that made each person effective. She didn't say anything about it, but her jaw set and she told everyone they were moving. They weren't stopping until they found him. She didn't know yet that he was 4 floors above a lava field, sprinting through the 85th floor of the dungeon while the ground shook under his feet. The shaking had started as a vibration, the kind that suggested something distant. Then it became something structural, something moving through the stone itself. Haruka checked his map skill and found the answer immediately. Every floor between him and the surface had lit up with movement indicators. Not 1 or 2 creatures, not a pack, hundreds, moving upward in a mass that had no gaps in it. The dungeon was releasing. He had heard guild members mention this in passing, the concept of a dungeon overflow, where the lowest floors filled beyond capacity and the pressure pushed everything upward and eventually outward. He had not expected to be inside the building when it happened. He and Angelica started moving faster. On the surface, a guard who had been taking a relaxed shift near the dungeon entrance watched rats pour out of the opening like water from a broken pipe. He stared at this for several seconds. Then he ran. The guildmaster heard his report, cross-referenced it against the old documentation on dungeon behavior, and felt his stomach drop. He pulled out a document that had not been opened in years and spread it on the table. The dungeon was a living structure. It expanded downward indefinitely. When it reached a threshold, when the floors became too dense with monsters to contain, the pressure reversed. Everything came out. The only way to stop it was to defeat whatever existed at the absolute bottom. Kill the dungeon boss, and every monster summoned by the dungeon structure would vanish with it. An earthquake rolled through the town. Civilians felt their floors move and came out into the streets looking at each other. The Lord of Amwi stood at his window and told them the adventurers had the situation handled, in the tone of someone who was not entirely certain this was true. The guildmaster ordered every available fighter to the gate. The first wave of monsters appeared on the road outside the walls, and the battle to keep the town standing began. Inside the dungeon, Haruka hit the 81st floor and found it flooded. Fish-time monsters erupted from the water in formation, coordinated strikes, fast and sharp. Angelica moved before he did, blades cutting through the ones closest while he studied the patterns of the ones still in the water. He identified the swordfish, long, silver, with an attack speed that made his precognition skill work harder than it had against the Emperor. He remembered how frozen fish moved, used ice magic to drag their temperature down, slowed them to something manageable, then sealed them inside his packing skill and moved past. The floor master summoned a tidal wave that filled the entire chamber. Haruka raised a surfboard from the stone floor, rode the wave while avoiding the creature's targeting, found the opening in its attack cycle, and ended the fight from above. He landed, checked his inventory, found a ring that increased his luck parameter, already maxed, so he filed it away, and a bracelet with a curse removal enchantment. He thought about Angelica. He thought about the armor. He kept climbing. The 75th floor had a necromancer. His staff ended it in one touch. He had never fully understood what the staff was built for until this moment, when the dark creature simply ceased to exist on contact. He looted an orb from the remains. The description said it granted mastery over the boundary between life and death. He read this twice, decided the dungeon was giving him things it thought he needed, and put it in his bag alongside the bracelet. He found Angelica waiting at the edge of the next floor. He handed her the bracelet and the orb without making a production of it. She hesitated, the kind of hesitation that looked like pride managing itself. He told her she needed them more than he did, and kept walking until she accepted them. A few floors later, she removed her helmet. Haruka looked at her and registered with mild shock that she was a person. A completely human-looking girl, maybe 17, with the general energy of someone who had been wearing a cursed skeleton suit for longer than was reasonable and was still processing the return to having a face. He said nothing that would make the moment more complicated than it needed to be and kept moving. The 74th floor was lava. Not metaphorically. The entire level was a field of heat and rock and channels of molten stone that made the air feel like breathing through a furnace. His stamina started draining before he had crossed a quarter of the floor. He kept moving until Angelica pointed at a corner where the stone configuration created a natural windbreak, a pocket of slightly less catastrophic air. He stopped, rested, let his stamina stabilize. Wind was moving through a crack in the wall nearby. He shaped it with his magic, turned it into a slow circulating current that brought cooler air across the space where they were sitting. His stamina came back degree by degree. He leaned against the stone and breathed, and thought about how far there still was to go. Then he heard a voice. Faint, from the other side of the wall, but completely recognizable. He called back, Toka's voice spiked in volume immediately. She had been calling his name for what sounded like a while. She asked if he could climb back up. He explained the geometry of his current situation, and the answer was no. But he knew where she was now. He told her to stay on the 54th floor. He would come to her.
Then Mario's voice came through the wall, smaller and faster, and delivered the information about the monster stampede in one continuous stream. The waves, the adventurers at the gate, the second wave already pressing against the walls, the only solution being the defeat of the dungeon boss. Haruka went quiet. He thought about Angelica standing 3 meters away, level 1, still carrying the damage of a curse she had lived inside for years. He thought about what the Guildmaster's plan actually required. He thought about the fact that Angelica had not been a monster, had never been a monster, had been a person trapped in the dungeon structure since before anyone in this town had been born, and had spent that entire time slowly being consumed by miasma, while the world above kept sending adventurers down to fight their way past her. He told Haruka. He told them he hadn't finished it. He also told them he was going to find another way. He looked at Angelica and said, out loud, that he needed her help. That he wasn't asking her to destroy herself. That he thought there was another option and he wanted to try it. She met his eyes, nodded once. He told Toka he would handle it. She said she believed him, in the voice of someone who had watched him handle things that shouldn't have been handleable and had updated her baseline expectations accordingly. He heard the second wave hit the gate through the stone of the wall, a sound like a thunderstorm arriving all at once. He heard Gartek's voice somewhere in the distance, then the Guildmaster's, then nothing but the noise of a town fighting for its life. He told Angelica it was time. She picked up her sword. He stacked every acceleration skill he had left, and they started moving upward through the remaining floors as fast as the dungeon would allow, burning through whatever stood between them and the surface, because the town above them was running out of time, and the only answer to that was getting there before it did.